My guest today is writer-director Brendan Devane, and being an avid ice climber, hiker, and skier, his first feature film, The Canyonlands, cemented his passion for telling stories in the great outdoors. After careers in sales and live music production, Brendan founded Sadieland Productions to create compelling feature films. And compelling is what we're talking about today, as his newest feature film, the terrifying horror thriller, The Sound, where a group of top climbers are granted access to the Forbidden Wall, a mysterious rock wall previously closed for decades. But what happens on that mountain needs to stay on that mountain. So let's welcome filmmaker Brendan Devane and his new film, The Sound, to the show. Welcome, Brendan.
Thanks, Ward. Great to be with you.
Well, where did the idea come from to create the story of The Sound?
Well, I wish I could say I had some sort of lightning bolt of inspiration, but that's unfortunately not how my brain works. I sort of had to piece it together with kind of separate ideas over a course of a year or so. But mostly, as you mentioned before, I had my own experience living in the mountains in Telluride, Colorado for years. Ice climbing, rock climbing, mountain, doing all sorts of things. So I have the background that kind of led me to be interested in stories like that. I've always enjoy Cliffhanger and Vertical Limit just like anybody else. They're really fun movies, right? But they don't necessarily portray mountaineering or rock climbing in the way that it actually happens. So it's been something that's been in the back of my mind to kind of do a rock climbing film that is more authentic to what actually goes on out there. And a few years ago, actually I guess it's now longer, I was watching the great documentary Free Solo with Alex Honnold, and as a climber, was just blown away about like how bold and daring that was and still is. No one's done it again, and no one probably will because it's so out there, right? But I read a review of that where someone called it the best horror movie they'd ever seen, and that certainly sparked a light bulb in my mind about like, oh, geez, a lot of people are afraid of heights and this sort of thing. Maybe if we put a kind of like a thriller suspense horror on the side of a big wall, it'll kind of build in more tension and natural anxiety just because of the setting that normally wouldn't be there. And so that sort of got the ball rolling.
Well, it's what you have to have that feeling when it comes to mountain climbing movies. And I think Free Solo is probably the best one. And there's some elements of Cliffhanger where you watch it and your legs just kind of turn to jello. And you bring us that element in this film, The Sound. So for a lot of us who have never climbed a mountain, we get the feeling of that fear of what it would be like if we were hanging off the side of one.
Perfect. That's what we're going for.
Well, I noticed that you have two types of mixtures in this film. First, it's the cast. Part real climbers, part actors. How did you cast the film with the aim to be authentic to the rock climbing community?
Well, when you're casting, your general rule of thumb, right, is if you listen to your casting directors, which you should, telling all those aspiring filmmakers out there, listen to your casting director. They do this for their job, right? They'll always tell you to take acting. Like if you're looking at two different people for a role, take the stronger actor. Even if this one maybe looks better or you like certain things about it, you generally want to get actors in your film, right? For this, it's a little bit more complicated. I'm a big fan, I'm a Generation Xer, a little over, I'm 52 now, big fan of the movie Point Break, the real one, the first one, and sort of lifted what Catherine did there when she cast the surfers, the ex-presidents behind Swayze. Those were all real surfers who had SAG cards, as opposed to the other way around, where you're looking at actors and then teaching them how to surf, right? She came to the conclusion it'd be easier to just teach surfers how to act a little bit than to teach actors how to surf, and she ended up being correct. For this, I sort of kind of lifted that same theory because even though actors are professional and they're used to basically pretending to be a lawyer or a doctor or a police agent or something like that, it takes years and years to learn the muscle memory of how to put in gear when you're climbing, how to belay somebody properly, all these things. It's just, if we were a big budget movie, I'd send them to rock climbing camp for 6 weeks. Okay, done, right? but that's just not possible at this level of filmmaking. So when we were casting the actors, we really dove into their background and put a premium on not just their acting ability, but whether they have personal climbing experience in their own personal lives. And most of them do. We had a couple where the acting was just so strong that it was worth it to kind of teach them how to do it. But for the most part, any of the people portraying the climbers actually do climb in their own personal lives. And I tried to show that in the credits, where we do kind of like a video credit thing, and they have personal pictures next to their name of them climbing in real life. And those were all their own photos that they supplied and weren't made for the film, or um, fabricated for those credits. And so yeah, that was very important as part of the casting, to get people who were comfortable in the vertical world, and that took some rock climbing experience.
Well, the second mixture I noticed was the mountains, and you did a wonderful job in meshing the real mountain with the second unit set wall. Did you have a rock climbing DP? And if so, how did that work?
Yeah, absolutely. Early on in pre-production, I realized that I couldn't make this film with a traditional film crew. Just not possible. They don't go into those spaces unless you're Tom Cruise. SAG doesn't really let you hang out 1,000 feet high in the air with your actors, right? So I had to think about, well, are we going to fake this all like you would kind of think a movie at this budget level would do? Or are we going to try to go out and enlarge the world and world build and give more realism and actually place the audience on this climb? And then I came up with the idea of basically having two film crews. I basically shot two movies at once here. We had a professional rock climbing film crew with professional rock climbers, and we had a traditional film crew with our actors, and we shot them completely separately, because neither would go with the other, right? So it presented some problems, of course it did, but I think ultimately it worked out, because we were able to get some of these shots of authentic rock climbers 1,000 feet in the air, which I think goes a long way to pulling the viewer into the world, and making them believe the world. So absolutely, we had several rock climbing only DPs, and then of course the DP who created the look of the film and shot inside the studio. It presented a little bit more problems because we had 7 different source files. And when you have, you've got your main stuff from an RE camera, and then we had some red camera up on the wall. There's some iPhone mixed in there. There's different kinds of drones, right? When you put all this together in post, you have to make sure that it's very homogeneous and that people can't tell that you just went from a $200,000 RE to an iPhone 16, right? And that it's got to be smooth. And when we worked a lot with the color correcting and some filmmaker tricks on how to do that, and it actually worked out well because it played in with some of the themes. We were able to work with the color person. I think I don't want to get too technical because I know a lot of people don't necessarily realize that the movie actually gets color corrected in post, not when you're actually shooting it. And I wanted to make it look more like it was shot on actual film, kind of a little more of an old school look. And so we added a film grain to it, a nice light glow to it. And not only did that enhance the feeling of the film, but it also blended all the different source files together so that when we can go from inside the studio to the real rock climbing and back and forth, it was hopefully, it seems a little bit seamless and doesn't pull the viewer out of the film from going back and forth between the two settings.
Okay. I love the technical aspects because I talk to so many film directors, and sometimes I know where coloring plays a big role in the film. So I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that I loved about the sound is that every scene is so seamless. So if you're looking at 5 different camera sources, the audience is never going to know, because you brilliantly put this together. And then with that grain, that's just enough to even add even more realism to the mountain scenes. So I love that. But I have to ask, how tall was the second unit wall, and was it specifically built for the film?
Well, I see. In my mind, the second unit is the one that filmed outside on the real wall, right? So inside on our studio, which to me was the primary shoot, it's not very big. Believe it or not, there's a lot of movie magic going on there. It was about 20 feet tall and about 20 feet wide. Now it was built to actually be climbed on. It was freestanding on the volume stage, and when you see the cast climbing on it, they are actually climbing on it. It took gear and everything like that. There's obviously ropes and safety wires you don't see that got taken out in post. But it's fairly small, and we got into, if you want to talk about technological, we got into some tech stuff on this film that you normally don't see in films at this budget level. One, shooting on a volume stage, it's typically $40,000 a day to shoot on a volume stage, right? That's out of the budget for this film and most independent films. Luckily, we're here in Las Vegas, and there is one volume stage here in town, and they worked with our budget, and we got a significant discount, thank God, to go in there and shoot. But what we did when you have such a small practical set is that we extended the set with the volume while projecting a background at the same time. And this is even difficult for, say, Marvel movies, right? When it's called a MOS tracking system that you put on the camera. So when the camera moves, the LED screen behind it moves as well, because as humans, our line of sight changes, so everything has to change. And then you're talking about does you're getting into program of the screens, like the background's moving, but the extension of the set doesn't move, right? So we had a lot of technical things that we were going through on the volume stage, but ultimately it was an awesome learning experience, and I'd like to think we pulled it off, but it was definitely at the range of what this budget level can do as far as technological stuff on a volume stage.
Well, I've heard, what is the connection of this film to Skywalker Ranch?
Well, Lucasfilm and Skywalker Sound did all the post sound work on this film, and so I, was fortunate enough to work out with them on my previous film. And it's just, hey, I'm 52 years old. I saw Star Wars in the movie theaters. That's my first film. I still remember it, 1977. I was like 4 years old, right? I've got all my toys still. They're not worth anything because I played with them, but huge into Star Wars. So it was just an absolute thrill to be able to go to the Skywalker Ranch, and when you're sitting there, like, you talk to Ben Burtt and you talk to the people who worked on those films, and you're in those studios where all that magic happens. Very fun for somebody like me, but also, it's one of the premier sound houses in the world, right? The guy who ran this program did all the dialogue for Avengers Endgame. So when you have that sort of level of professionalism with your projects, I didn't have to worry about post sound. That's usually a worry for a director, especially something called the sound, right? It's got to sound good. Me, I had no concerns whatsoever, because I knew that Skywalker Sound would just absolutely crush it. There are trade-offs. We spend probably 25% of our budget on post sound. That's unheard of in filmmaking in general. Imagine Marvel spending 25% of $200 million on their sound design. It doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen on the indie level as well. But for me, it was so important with this film that we needed it. And it's called the sound. It's obviously not about the sound per se, but especially with horror and thriller, your audio is just so important. It's so important. It's not like rom-coms or Ace Ventura, which I love, one of my favorite movies of all time, right? But you could put music behind that, whatever, and Jim Carrey's still going to be funny. With horror movies, the sound really, really affects whether people feel the tension, whether people connect with the scene, if you have jump scores, whether they connect or not, right? And so I didn't have that much an issue, putting so much of our resources into the sound design of this, because obviously Lucasfilm isn't cheap. They're wonderful about working with independent filmmakers like myself, as George has always founded Lucasfilm to work for independents. But now that Disney owns them, it's a little bit tougher to get in there, right? And it's like, you don't tell them when your post is happening. They told me when my post was happening, right? So we were done sitting on the film for a little bit before our turn came up to go to Skywalker Ranch, and then I spent 3 weeks there, working on the film, working with the great guys there, and hopefully making it sound good for people.
Well, let's talk about the sound because you chose sound as the villain, so to speak. Why sound and not some big hairy yeti?
Well, that could be another movie, right? I was actually, I can tell you where the moment where it was. I know you're in Texas, but I was in California, just a little bit outside of Fresno, California, on Route 99. I was coming back from the Skywalker Ranch, who did my previous project as well, and it just kind of popped in my head. Like, what if I had a villain that was a sound wave? One, I think that's cool because I'm into sound, I'm into music, I'm into sound and all that sort of stuff in my personal life. And then when you think about it as a producer, you go, well, there's an actor I don't have to cast. There's VFX I don't necessarily have to deal with, right? It becomes a little bit easier when you start thinking about how to piece together a project, because even, I wore the hat as a writer, I wore the hat as a director, but I'm also the producer of the film. And a lot of times the director and the producer are at war. And so I'm at war with myself because the director wants more explosions, bigger, higher wall, more people, more extras, more. And the producer's going, we can't afford it. We can't do that. No, 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 along with the UPM, right? So part of developing films for me, I don't have $100 million to work for. So I have to develop things based on stuff I can actually film. And I think that's where some places where I'd recommend first-time screenwriters really think about it. If you're going to write a spec script for a $200 million movie, okay, cool. Then write as big as you want, nuclear explosions. But if you want to write for something that's actually going to get made for $2 million, you have to write a script that can be filmed for $200. And that takes thought, and that takes building it. And so having a villain as a sound wave fit a lot of things. One, I thought it was cool. I thought it was a different idea that viewer haven't really seen, no pun intended. And it would be just easier to film on our budget level and from a production aspect. So that's
Well,
how it kind
see,
of came about.
I love the fact that the so-called villain here in this thriller is a sound wave, because there's other elements in this film that enhances this sound. I love the fact that you brought in the Indian aspect because it brings forth a spiritual aspect of the sound. And then when I was watching the film, the best line in the whole film is, and it says, the only evil there is what evil they take with them, because nature is neutral. You're a climber. Because we're talking about a sound, do you battle your own thoughts if you're climbing solo?
Yeah, absolutely. It's 100% that. For those of us, and I think most people have seen Free Solo now, they actually scanned Alex Honnold's brain, and it turns out that he reacts to fear differently than human beings do because he's physiologically wired different in his brain, right? For the rest of us, we're scared. There's been times when I've been scared climbing, absolutely. And just like any other profession that deals with tension, police officers, firefighters, military, what have you, panicking in those situations probably, generally leads to not good outcomes. And so when you're rock climbing, what you really have to do is, and you're in a sketchy situation, is quiet your mind, and keep those obtrusive thoughts out. And, oh, I'm going to fall, or this is going to happen, or this is going to happen, right? Those lead to, fear and getting stuck and not going forward or down, right? And so you sort of train yourself to keep those out of mind and keep your mind clear. There's several things inside. I'm glad you brought up that line because it is one of my favorite lines in the film. The actress Jolene who spoke it was like, "Thank you for giving me the best line in the film," because I really do think that nature is neutral, right? Sharks only eat people because we're dumb enough to go where they live. It's not like they're on the beach hunting humans or something like that, right? Or a rock fall isn't going, you know what, I'm going to take out that climber now. It's just how it is. And I've always felt since I was a little kid, that or understood that good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. And there's really no rhyme or reason. I know that a lot of people like to have other thoughts about karma or fate or anything like that. But me personally, I think stuff just happens because it happens. And in that regard, nature is really neutral. I don't look at a shark as a killing machine. I just look at it as another animal that's going to eat you if you're in its food chain, right?
Well,
And
yeah,
same.
because the whole thing about nature is neutral is we walked into their territory and that's the unknown. And so that was the unknown factor in this film. Now, I loved Colton because he was the perfect example of carrying evil upon the mountain, and his pride was his evil. But that's all I'm going to say because um, there's an element in this film that I want everybody to see. So I want to leave it at that. But Colton was the perfect example of carrying that evil to the mountain.
Yeah, I mean, for lack of a better, Colton's a dick, right? For lack of a better term, it's
You
his
said
company.
it.
He's kind of a dick, and you have fun with characters, right? I think there's so many things about script writing, and I'm obviously not. I don't believe myself to be that great of a writer or anything, but like I think if I go back and look at my first script that I wrote 20 years ago, not only does it suck, but the characters are all the same because we tend to do that. We tend to put ourselves, when we don't know what we're doing, we tend to put ourselves in the characters and they all become sort of the same character because it's our voice coming through them. You have to write different personalities in there, right? So part of this was like, I need a dick on the mountains, kind of, and Colton is the one who's driving people up there. There's other aspects I could get into with you about the Colton character. I don't want to get that are spoilery, but
Yeah, we don't want to spoil it because this is a great film that people need to see.
but yeah, he was, and Nick was a great guy. Nick Baruti, the guy who played Colton, just nailed it from his first taped interview. I was like, he just had the attitude and everything down about it. In real life, Nick is a really nice guy, right? That's what I love about filmmaking is that you just get some of the biggest villains on screen who tend to be the nicest people, in real life. Or like, are you sure? Am I being a big enough dick for you? I'm like, oh, you're doing great. So yeah, trying to get different personalities involved to give characters life, to make them more realistic, because we've all seen films where every character sort of seems the same, and those tend to be the same kind of films, lower budget horrors or whatever, where there's not really a lot of character development. And that's fine with things like In Violent Nature or Daddy Longlegs or some of these newer films where it is about the kills. If your film's about the kills, cool. We don't need to know about the characters, right? We want to see them get killed. This film isn't necessarily about the kills. There is a character development going on with most of them. So
Yeah, but see, that's the cool thing, Brendan. That's what I love. See, my favorite thing about film is character development. In this film, if people watch it very closely, before they ever get to the mountain, when they're meeting in a group outside the trailer, they're outside, you see the mountain in the background. That right there is this very quick character development because you see each one and how they react and you already know. So I love the way that you bring the character development into this film because the audience knows right off very quickly where all of the characters stand. And for some, we may see their strong points and we may see their weak points. And then it all comes together within the story of this film. So I think the whole character thing, you just did it brilliantly.
thank you. It definitely try to, like I said, there in movies like this, there tends not to be a lot of room for character development, especially when you're trying to get done in an hour and a half, right? Like this movie couldn't be 2.5 hours long. It just couldn't. So I think we clocked in at 1 hour 39 before credits, right? And you're leaving. Like my first draft was probably 98 pages. The second draft was 105. The third draft's 111. The fourth draft's 115. Right as you come up with ideas and start going, hey, let's put this in. Let's put this in. Let's put this in. Like the last Luna, the last scene between Sean, the lead character, and his father, I actually wrote that 2 days before we filmed it. So you're always, at least me, I'm always trying to make things better. I'm always trying to make it better, trying to add stuff, even right up to the last moment. Even when you're filming a scene, like everyone's got different work processes. Clint Eastwood's famous for just doing 2 takes, moving on, 2 takes, moving on, 2 takes, moving on. I get that. I identify with that. Partly because when you're on a lower budget film, you don't have time to David Fincher 59 takes of someone putting a soda can down, right? I understand that on that level, that's what you're doing. But if I got hung up on 59 takes and we're trying to get through 10 pages a day, it's not happening, right? So you have to have some sort of speed at this level to get to actually complete on your shooting days. But my attitude is like, well, the first time I get what I want, we'll do it again. And then I usually give the actors a turn. That's what I call their take. If they have something that comes out, if they want to improvise a line or something like that. Because my feeling about filmmaking, you need the director, you need someone helming the ship, someone making everybody, making sure everyone's rowing in the same direction. But at the same time, I don't have a monopoly on good ideas, right? I want to hear everyone's ideas. I may not go with your idea, but I want to hear it. I don't care if you're a PA or the G&E grumbling in the back that lunch is 15 minutes late or something like that. I want to hear everybody's ideas, and I truly believe it's a collaborative process.
Yeah, and it
And
was perfect. It was perfect. But I've got to ask you because I want to ask you about the music score because it enhances the feeling of the unknown in the film. Part of it has a meditative aura about it. Then there's this mixture of a bit of thunder, a little bit of rhythmic heartbeat sound, or a spiritual drum beat. What was your goal with the soundtrack more than just to create tension?
Um, for me, I identify scores as maybe being more important than maybe other filmmakers. I'm not really sure. Obviously, somebody like Christopher Nolan working with Zimmer, score is a huge part of like Interstellar or something like that. And I feel the same way, especially in this genre. Um, in horror, you have to use score a little differently than some other films because without music, the audience is left up to their own interpretation of the scene and how they want to feel about the scene. And that's fine for rom-coms or comedies or whatever. But with horror, you sometimes have to lead the audience a little bit into how they should be feeling about a little scene. As I like to say, if we put Baby Elephant Walk behind some of these scenes, it's a much different movie, right? And so when we were looking for someone to do the original score for this film, we came across James Iha, who's the founding member of the Smashing Pumpkins, very well-known, famous musician. But it turns out that The Thing is one of his favorite movies of all time. And so when he learned about the project and the fact that it was inspired by the Thing, and we have some similar themes in it, he got really excited to do it. And when you're working with somebody like that, what am I going to tell him? Use certain chords? Or like, no, I'm a fan of hiring talented people, like I said, and letting them work. And so you sit down with James, and my style is that you spot it together. And I'm just talking about emotions with a scene. I'm not telling them to go to D minor or do this or do this. We look at a scene and I go, this is what I want the audience to feel when they're watching this scene, the emotion behind it. Then let him write the music of how he thinks what the emotion driving music should be behind it. Now, I did ask for a little bit of a sci-fi touch, so you do get a little bit of sci-fi stuff later on the film. But I think he did an absolute wonderful job of creating a soundscape that went with the sound design that Skywalker did, and our licensed music that we put in the movie as well. Right off the bat, when I was talking to the music supervisor, I felt like it's a rock climbing movie. We should have rock music, and so that's kind of where we started from as far as the score and the music that came in with it.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And, ladies and gentlemen, The Sound is a suspense thriller and it doesn't give you a moment of rest. A group of climbers embark on a dangerous climb that has been off limits for over 60 years. What initially begins as an audacious expedition transforms into a battle for survival against a force that toys with them both physically and mentally. Brendan Devane's film The Sound creates a perfect balance between the characters in the mountain, but the audience will focus on the characters far more than the mountain, but the unknown force on that mountain is constantly lurking. And you'll be asking yourself, is it coming for the climbers or is it coming for me? And that's what psychological thrillers are all about. The Sound is available on video on demand on June 27th, so add this one to your list. You will not be disappointed. So, Brendan, I want to thank you so much for talking about your amazing film, The Sound, today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ward. Really appreciate it.
You bet. And ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel, and you can listen to us on your way to work on Spotify and many other channels. And hey, you're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.
Kristen, Brad, do you copy?
You coming down?
Don't cry. Mommy's here now. It'll all be over soon.